The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, America. Good morning, world. Good morning, CHD. Welcome. Once again, my name is Michael Kane. I am the Director of Advocacy here at Children's Health Defense. Today, we have Media Spin on CHD Win. I have attorney Ray Flores, who is coming on today to discuss CHD-backed lawsuit that he spearheaded that got Secretary Kennedy to create the task force that HHS is legally required to create to investigate the safety of the vaccine schedule. And also, as you just saw on that show card after my segment, the great, the phenomenal, the amazing Meryl Nass is going to be coming on and continuing to discuss the crisis that is happening with our food system, as well as the solutions to having a safe, healthy, and correct food system here in America and across the world. So we're going to get into all of that. But first, as always, we have news. CHD has a conference that is happening in Austin, Texas, the 7th through the 9th. Look at that lineup. Leslie Manookian, Charles Eisenstein, Pierre Corey, Andy Wakefield, Dr. Peter McCullough, and so many more. We have nearly 20 speakers right now. We have some amazing panels talking about the media spin on measles, talking about looking at Vax, the original movie. We have a surprise that's coming on that. And also, there are already some confirmed speakers we have not announced that once we do announce, we are going to sell out. I can't say any more right now, but it has happened. Secure your tickets ASAP. Make sure you're there with us in Austin, Texas. Before we get into the media spin on this huge win from Ray Flores backed by CHD, there was another huge win I think most of my audience has heard about, but if you haven't, Sarah Doe won the right to a medical exemption in New York schools. This was a CHD-backed lawsuit, and New York has had a horrendous situation where medical exemptions are being persecuted. People are being kicked out of school. Here's Sarah at the courthouse right after her win. It was just absolutely phenomenal. We had some great local media news coverage, which really seemed to completely change everything that's starting to happen in New York. There you're actually seeing Morning Wire had covered it as well, too, in D.C. nationally. Let's take a look at the one news organization that was on the scene when this happened, News 12. Let's show their clip on this real quick.
That student was just weeks away from possibly being denied entry to her school. But today, the judge ordered the Oceanside School District to grant that student a medical exemption, allowing her to attend classes without receiving the third dose of the hepatitis B vaccine. That's after the student's physician determined she should not receive that third dose following a bad reaction to a previous dose.
So what is important about this one case is it's having ripples across the entirety of New York State. The judge's opinion isn't even released yet. It's not even complete. But because there was 200 people there, because the media picked this up and has reported it so well, we are hearing of medical exemptions in New York being granted right now that weren't being granted before, that were being denied, that are now getting passed because of this decision. Let's look at the crowd that we had there. I say we had over 200 people. Some people said no, we had closer to 400. The media said 100. Media spin, right? There you go. But let's also take a look at the wonderful young lady of the day, Sarah Doe, her attorney, Sujata Gibson, right behind her, her parents, and also Angelo. Angelo's a wonderful young man. When he came into the courtroom, they didn't have a seat for him, and the court officers found one for him. And he looked at me. He said, "What's going on, boys?" And he's just one of the greatest young men in the world. He too is kicked out of school. because his medical exemption was denied. And we are hoping that that is going to change very soon as well, too. It's hard to explain the excitement that's happened in New York. We have no religious exemption to vaccination here, and the medical exemption has been stomped all over for 6 years. And thank God, thanks to CHD, Sujata Gibson, and just this great effort that has happened, that is finally breaking and changing. Are you in New York? Do you have a medically fragile child that was injured by a vaccine? Do you have a child that put forth a medical exemption, but it was denied by the school? Tomorrow, Wednesday, August 20th, you want to come on this Zoom. Attorney Chad Davenport, who is co-counsel with Sujata Gibson in this big win, is going to be talking through everything you need to know about medical exemptions in New York. The link for this will be in the show notes. You need to register for the Zoom. It's very important that if this impacts you and your family, you come on, learn what can you do, what can't you do, learn exactly what just happened, because it's really important. Few more news points, and then we're going to bring Ray on. LifeSite News just reported about my case, Kane versus de Blasio, NYC teachers who refused COVID jab petition Supreme Court to get their jobs back. I was actually quoted in this, which was nice. NYC Mayor Eric Adams is still fighting unvaccinated workers viciously, tooth and nail, to keep us from returning to our jobs. A group of educators fighting to be reinstated and compensated, fired for not getting the shot. That's my group, Teachers for Choice, that I have founded. We are still fighting in the courts. We're backed by Children's Health Defense. We're petitioning the Supreme Court. We should hear this fall if they will hear this case or if they won't hear this case. It's anyone's guess. There's 7 or 8 vaccine cases at SCOTUS's door right now, knocking, saying, hello, let us in. That's bad for my case because they only pick a few, but it's good for the movement because it shows the Supreme Court we are not going anywhere. This issue's not going away. There's a ton of momentum. And shout out to LifeSite News for covering that. Okay, before I bring Ray on, let's just quickly lay out what happened in his case. Back in May, Ray filed a complaint, a citizen's petition in regards to the task force that had not been created to investigate safety of vaccines, which HHS is required to do. Ray came on the show here. We had a nice show. Defender covered it. It got a lot of media attention. Shortly thereafter, RFK Jr. seeks extra time to explore early resolution in vaccine safety lawsuit. And then just a few days ago, Ray won. Ray won the case. CHD won. HHS reinstates task force on safer childhood vaccines in response to lawsuit funded by Children's Health Defense. This came about by a simple press release, a very simple press release that was put out by HHS. Let's bring Ray on and let's get, we got the press release right there. HHS revives task force on safer childhood vaccines. Ray Flores, come on the show with me today. It's so great to have you here. How you doing?
Oh, I'm fantastic. Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much for all your support and getting the word out.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, and thank you, for trusting me. This was the first podcast to break this news. I think Defender was the first news publication to break this news. And I always appreciate your trust and us talking about these things. But before we go into that, we have to assume there's some people watching that don't know exactly what happened. I went through it quickly. Why don't you just give people a summary of like what happened, what went down up to this historic, amazing, quick victory?
Yes, it was quick and it was huge. It was, first of all, it was a citizen's action. So I don't want people to be confused between a citizen's petition, which are largely ignored, and they're kind of prerequisites for filing suit, as citizen's action, which is written into the 86 Act. And so that's important to understand the difference, because there is a right that if the secretary is not performing a non-discretionary duty, then a citizen can give 60 days notice, And if they don't do what they have to do, not supposed to or should do, what they have to do, such as establishing the task force, not forming it for a little bit and then getting rid of it after a while, but actually establishing it. And then if they don't, then you can, file suit. And then the other thing that they didn't do was they never filed with Congress the vaccine safety reports. That was also mandatory as well. And that press release not only establishes a task force for the world to see, but it also commits to the biennial reports, which means every 2 years. So that to me was enough to then dismiss the case.
So, okay, so your case is now officially dismissed. Is there any possibility it would come back? Do you have that option? Was it dismissed with prejudice? Give us those details.
Yes, we filed the stipulated dismissal. The court hasn't actually ordered it or signed off on it yet, so it's not actually official. But the government agreed to without prejudice, meaning that I can refile. And I need that because I need an anvil over their head to make sure that they do what they say they're going to do. When Bobby's predecessor comes in or whatever, successor comes in, then all of a sudden, I'm going to have to hold their feet to the fire as well. And not only that, but the world should take note that if there's anything that is not being done correctly, that they see, they can file one too. And it provides for attorney fees. It's a wonderful strength that the citizens have.
So you talked about a biennial report.
Yes.
So HHS is supposed to, this task force overseen by HHS is supposed to see this biennial report on vaccine safety, and it's supposed to be submitted to Congress. Has that ever happened? Because 1986 is a long time since this was codified. Has this ever happened before that a report was presented to Congress as is statutory law?
Never. There's no
Never.
record.
There was, remember, Ray, CNN picked up this story and it got a lot of traction off of CNN. And out of nowhere, they brought up a report that happened in the 90s that was stored by a university. Do you remember that?
Yes, it is the final report by the NIH, which is the person who's supposed to be the department that's supposed to be the chair of the task force. So they provided a final report, what they called a final report, but they didn't do it for the 8 years previous. They hadn't ever done one before. So then they finally do one, call it a final report. They disband the task force, but there is absolutely no record of the HHS secretary, submitting that to Congress. And that is the problem with it. And not only that, but I'm not sure at all if what that report says completely covers all the obligations of the NIH under the 86 Act.
Well, if it wasn't submitted to Congress, they definitely didn't complete what the law says. The law doesn't say it's to be created and then stored in a university in secret in a vault somewhere for 30 years. That's not what the law says. The law is pretty clear, I believe.
Yes, and it's the HA secretary who then has the obligation to then report that.
So you brought up NIH. Talk to us about what is required in the structure of this task force. Was Secretary Kennedy able to appoint who he wanted, or what does the statute say specifically on this?
Well, sure, it has to be the director of the NIH, the FDA, and then the CDC. So there has to just be those three departments, the heads of each of those three departments that automatically comprise the task force. And they also have to do some consulting with ACCV, the children's vaccine organization, to make sure that that everything is being done correctly with VICP.
So this task force right now was set up in the press release with Dr. Jay Bhattacharya heading it currently.
Yeah, and the beauty of it is that, nobody can point the finger at Mr. Kennedy for 2 years and say, what are you doing? You're not a doctor, this and that. The point is that he's director and he's a doctor. So enough said, and then leave Mr. Kennedy alone for 2 years, and let's wait and see what the report comes out as.
Yeah, and I want to say I'm really excited that it is Dr. Jay Bhattacharya. Back in 2021, I was actually had the privilege of being on Fox News with the good doctor on the Laura Ingraham angle. We were discussing fired unvaccinated teachers and the lawsuit, which now is trying to go to the Supreme Court. He wrote an amicus brief saying that the COVID shot should not be mandated, saying that people should be accommodated. And he's been very outspoken about science, speaking for science, that he'd always post on Twitter, on X, science TM trademarked, right? Just making fun of how, like, what science has become is what it is not, that it has become it has become the trust the experts situation. He's been so outspoken about that. And I've been so impressed with what I've seen from him over the past 4 years. I'm personally very happy to see that this is the man that's going to be leading this task force. I personally have faith in him and what he might come out with at the end of this. I'm not sure your opinion on that, but that's mine currently.
Oh, absolutely. I feel the same way. And you brought up the CNN article, and there were other, pro-vax experts, so to speak, that are talking about how there's already safety studies going on. This is just going to be redundant. Well, this is not a redundancy. This is required by law. And then the Maha Commission report or any of these other safety studies are not the same as what's required under the 86 Act. And it is thorough. I mean, they have to look at licensing, and it can't just be a rubber stamp. The manufacturing,
Right.
that means ingredients and quality, use instructions, warning to parents. Why does it always say that adverse reactions are considered rare? The distribution of the product, making sure that, for example, with the COVID shots, where it has to be like, cryogenically frozen, along with Walt Disney's head, as they're shipping it out to the distribution centers, and then field surveillance, which is really important to me, and adverse reaction reporting. This to me is the biggest one, that they have to actually dig into the problem. And I think the reason that they don't like the idea of this task force is they actually have to do a complete and thorough job. And that's one that's going to prove embarrassing for people who've been just rubber stamping these vaccines and getting $1 billion in royalties on the kickbacks, so to speak, to the government for the mRNA vaccines. And the other thing that's really important to me is the recall of reactogenic lots. So remember that there are hot lots where there's only supposedly around 5% of the lots on the COVID vaccines that were causing all the problems. Well, why didn't they recall them? Why didn't they make a report on it? To me, this is the kind of thing that should have been in real time, that they could have had this task force already in line. And then lastly, it's research is needed. And that means that it's going to decrease the adverse events and make vaccines safer than they were in 1986. And we know for a fact that they are not.
That was a wonderful summary, Ray, like of just the breadth of this task force is not simply, are they safe? Yes, check a box. There is a lot that needs to be covered here. And this is just like you said, no wonder they didn't want it. No wonder Big Pharma and Big Pharma shills and representatives who were puppets for Big Pharma didn't want this. This isn't going to go over well for vaccine manufacturers, because we do know that there has been all of these problems. I want to get into the headline that we kind of ran this show under, CHD win and media spin. So you told me there were really only three news sources that got it right. Lou, I think we actually have the logos for those three news sources. You said that the Defender, Children's Health Defense, got the story right. You said Epoch Times got it right as well too, and the Center Square. These were the places that you said this was accurate press reporting. But there was a lot of good coverage, even positive coverage, but I don't know how accurate the coverage was. Why don't we put up that next slide? One of the first things you said to me, there it is. CHD's name is always preceded by the word anti-vax group. That's something that seems to just continue and perpetuate. Why don't you talk about that and the other important media spins that we had in this important win?
Yes, I want to say a thank you to Zachary Steiber from the Epoch Times and Brett Rowland from the Center Square, because they didn't insert those words in there and try and make everything, appear like what it like what it isn't. And for them to always have to put in, anti-vax group, why do they do that? Why do they, the anti-vax group claims or, seems to believe that. And then the other side is always the authority, but they know the scientists have already firmly established, right? So they always, play one game against the other. And once you pull the curtain back, then you're less likely to believe the BS.
Ray, I was actually interviewed by Newsday, which is a very big publication in New York. It's a daily newspaper, gets a lot of circulation, about the Sarah win, which we opened up with earlier in this case. And the reporter on the phone said to me, I'm going to refer to CHD as a vaccine skeptical organization. Is that fair? I said, I think that is fair, especially compared to what we normally get. It gets published and it says vaccine skeptical next to my name, but over in the subhead, there it is. And I actually reached out and I said, hey, you actually made a point to bring this up to me and tell me you weren't going to do this. He said, well, then I checked the Wall Street Times and the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, and they said anti-vax. So I gave you anti-skeptical next to your name as a courtesy. And it's like, wow, like just the backflips that you're doing and misrepresenting yourself, to me personally as well too. So I mean, it seems like one. But you want to know one other thing I want to say about this?
Hey,
People
well,
are carrying.
You believed him, Michael.
Well, I reached out to him. I was like, hey, why are you lying to me? But the important thing I think also is it matters less and less every day. People are realizing it's a slur. People are kind of realizing that it doesn't hold the weight. It doesn't just brush away the facts the way it used to do so. And that's actually very promising to see in this space. I do think the American people, not all, but I do think the majority are starting to wake up on this issue.
Yes, and you're right that the language is not as severe as it used to be, and in fact, every article was generally positive about CHD and Mary Holland, which is a big deal to me because Mary Holland is the superstar of CHD without
Amen.
question. Besides
Amen
you,
to
Michael.
No, of course, it's Mary, Brian, Hooker, Polly, Tommy. We got so many superstars over here. Hey, Lou, let's put that slide back up. Ray, talk to us about some of the other media spin and inaccuracies that happened throughout the reporting on this.
Yes, they also said that the final report was already issued. So what's the point? Why are you resurrecting something if the final report was already, is already issued? And it says HHS revives the task force, but that's what the press release said. But the coverage said they resurrect the task force, meaning he brought it back from the dead for no reason. Like this was his plan all along, like some kind of Frankenstein plan. So I didn't appreciate that. And then the other thing they always put in those articles is they always bring up measles or something else, like they have nothing to do at all with this. They should be focusing only on what the task force is supposed to accomplish. And in fact, there is no article that actually broke down all the requirements of what it is that the task force is supposed to do. So, how is that supposed to be newsworthy? And I'll tell you one thing, until you're sitting in the middle of a case where you know all the exact details, and then you read about yourself, or you read about, unfortunately, most of the heat came to CHD, right? But when you read about it, it's appalling to see how they twist everything. No wonder they call it fake news.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting and fascinating analysis. With this report, after Defender broke it, and after you came on with me on CHD TV, especially the CNN report, but others, it went gangbusters out there. And there's an analysis that PR firms do and news analysts and specialists do, and some of ours at CHD did, that showed through third parties, it reached over 600 million people. So I'm not saying that 600 million people came to CHD, but how many times it was linked to, how many times it was referenced, and then how many times it viewed that. Over 500 million people heard about this lawsuit and what was happening in this. And then we see one of the quickest I don't even know. I was going to say capitulations, but I don't think that's what it was. But one of the quickest uh, admissions that you're correct. Listen, I've seen a lot of lawsuits. When we talk about the Sarah Doe lawsuit, that was 6 years in the making. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was co-counsel back in 2019 with Sujata Gibson on this stuff in New York. And here it was 6 years later, we're finally tasting a touch of justice. What was this for you, Ray? 3-4 months? I mean, how quickly did this one actually pop?
5 months, because it was a 60-day notice, and then then the extension, and then the decision to finally form it. So 5 months, till about today. So yeah.
And just, I want to know, what would you attribute that to? I mean, because you've done this, that's not the norm. What do you think just happened here?
I mean that lawsuit was airtight. I mean, I made sure I covered all the bases on the citizens' actions. There's only been 3 other cases in the '86 Act that have ever been filed, and they were all unsuccessful. But they were all poorly drafted. They didn't have separate standing for injury, and they didn't actually have a non-discretionary duty that was alleged to have been, not done. And I made sure that the non-discretionary duty is the task force and the biennial reports.
The last thing I want to say is, when you were on this show and we talked about this, and some people, they'll remain nameless from now, but you got attacked. Some people attacked you for doing this. Some people weren't happy about it. And people were saying you were attacking Bobby Kennedy. And you said, I'm not attacking Bobby Kennedy. I love Bobby Kennedy. This is a brotherly shove. And I really liked that analogy. I've told you I have 2 little boys. I see brotherly shoves all the time. On the way out here, why don't you talk to us a little bit about that analogy, about the brotherly shove that you and ultimately CHD felt had to happen?
Well, I mean, CHD has to continue to call the balls and the strikes, regardless of whether or not their founder, who's no longer with CHD anymore, is now in Washington in a very, very powerful position. But on the other hand, he is our champion. He is the one who needs to get this done. And he's the only one who can, the only one who's, getting it done so far. Obviously, for everybody else, it can't happen quick enough. And that's part of the problem. But, when you look at what the pressures that he's under, that already exist, this lawsuit was the perfect way to allow him to do his job. And why did they wait 5 months to do it? Why did he's been in there 6 months already? He already knew they had never formed this task force. They had never, or they had never provided the reports. So why didn't he do that on day one? Because he couldn't. So now he asserted himself. And the day he asserts himself is the day that the real changes, the important changes, not just the Fruit Loops, that's the day that things are going to change. And so we've empowered him in a way like never before. And hopefully those other people will finally be quiet, because they're going to have to put in the Maha strategy report that this task force is now active. So now all of a sudden children's vaccines are back in the spotlight, and you haven't heard anything about, donuts, for a couple of weeks. Everybody's talking about this. So that was my main point.
A brotherly shove for justice. Ray Flores, God bless you. You're an amazing attorney. I'm very proud to call you my friend as well too. Thank you so much for coming on here and breaking down the media spin and what just happened. I'm sure I'm going to have you on again soon. Thanks so much, brother.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. Woo, feels good. We had a good couple weeks over here at CHD, and now it is my pleasure. It is my honor to turn it over to just one of the fiercest medical freedom warriors on the planet, a medical freedom warrior before 99% of us knew we needed to be medical freedom warriors, the amazing Dr. Meryl Nass.
Good morning. It's great to be back. And today I have as my guest Pete Kennedy, who has probably been in this space as long as I have. So Pete has been working on improving the situation for farmers and consumers of meat and milk, particularly raw milk, for many years, going state by state to try to ease the restrictions that the federal government and the states have put on farmers and consumers who are suffering under something like 200,000 different rules and regulations that affect meat in the United States, and has tried to get the opportunity for people to actually consume raw milk, which in many cases has to be purchased for their pets rather than themselves. So let me bring on Pete. And Pete, tell us about the problems with the ability of farmers to grow cattle and sell them to consumers, and for consumers to be able to buy high quality beef and raw milk. Thanks.
Sure. Good morning, Meryl. Well, with meat, there's basically a lack of, there's a slaughterhouse shortage in the country right now. There are less than, I think less than 1,000 USDA slaughterhouses in the whole country. Maybe there are 2,000 or 3,000 state inspected slaughterhouses. And what's going on is the small farmer and rancher doesn't have access in a lot of areas of the country, doesn't have timely access. In some states, they have to book 2 years in advance before they can bring their animals into slaughter. And a lot of this just stems from a law Congress passed almost 60 years ago, the 1967 Wholesome Meat Act. And what happened with that act is the federal regulation preempted any conflicting state regulation. And what that, at the time it was passed, there were some states that even allowed for on-farm slaughter and the sale of meat by the cut, direct to consumer. There were, and under the Federal Meat Inspection Act, amended by the Wholesome Meat Act, you can't sell meat unless an inspector is present for both slaughtering and processing of the meat. And that 1967 Act brought on a lot of additional expenses. Before then, like I said, within the states, there were facilities that would be able to slaughter and process without inspection. It was cheaper to get up and running. There really weren't the safety problems the proponents of this act tried to claim there were. So this was really an industry consolidation measure that was portrayed as a Consumer Protection Act.
Yeah, so let me repeat that. What these laws did, particularly the 1967 law, was say you could not sell meat across state lines unless it had been checked by a USDA inspector before it was slaughtered and then after it was slaughtered as well. And then additional requirements were put on slaughterhouses. And so although the United States had thousands of them scattered throughout the country, they slowly started shuttering. And the big boys started building very large ones. So now there's only 600 something USDA approved slaughterhouses in the United States. And so there isn't enough capacity to actually slaughter all the cows and other livestock that the United States needs to eat. And so as a result, over the last 2 or 3 years, the United States has become a net importer of beef, which is very strange because we are, in fact, the largest food exporter in the world as a country. But in terms of beef, we are importing more than we export. And this was never the case previously. So one of the reasons is the farmer can't raise the cattle because he doesn't have access to slaughterhouses and processing facilities. Or when he does have access, they're not paying him enough to make any money. So many of the ranchers have reduced their herds. And at this point, the total number of cows being raised in the United States is at the lowest level it has been since 1951, even though the population has more than doubled since then. Now, tell us about some of the other requirements, rules and regulations, some of the ways that the USDA has made it hard for ranchers to stay in business economically, if you will.
Well, so what the Wholesome Meat Act did was, even if you were selling meat within a state, you had to file, comply with the federal regulations. The state could have their own laws, but they had to be at least as strict as the federal regulations. So that just increased the cost of building and operating a plant. There are these food safety requirements that came on line later called HACCP, which stands for Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points. And that added a significant amount of cost on to the bill. And what happened, Meryl, was there's a damning Senate committee report a few years after the passage of the Wholesome Meat Act, which just said meat at one time was a competitive business. One of the more meat processing was one of the more competitive businesses out there. And it kind of foresaw what is happening today, because right now, I think, many of the viewers know that just 4 companies control 80 to 85% of beef, and another 4 companies control about 70% of pork. And it's just created a situation where in 1967, there were about 10,000 slaughterhouses at the time of the passage of the Wholesome Meat Act. Today, there are about 3,000. The population is, probably anywhere 50, 60% greater then. So what it's done is just the farmers aren't able to get their animals to the slaughterhouses on a timely basis, and they're just not able to meet the growing consumer demand for quality meat.
Right. So up until 1967, the states were mainly regulating the quality and all the other issues associated with raising cattle and slaughtering them and processing them. But basically, the federal government took over and said that the state, even those slaughterhouses that were being inspected and run by the state, had to be at least as strict as the federal requirement. So that sounds, on its face, that sounds fine. We want, meat to be safe, and we want it to be healthy. So that's all good. But the result was that the small slaughterhouses, where everyone knew what was going on and your meat could be cut and prepared locally and you had local butchers, they just went out of business. And what you got instead were these huge factories that processed millions of cows a year. So they might be slaughtering and processing 3,000 to 5,000 cows a day, which is, quite remarkable, really. That actually immigrants make up about 50% of the employees in these factories. They're not fun places to work. There's a lot of injuries. And they're located far apart from each other, so that a cattleman is going to take a lot of time to bring his cattle or his other animals to the slaughterhouse. He has an appointment. He's got to get it there by the appointment date, or maybe he can't get an appointment. Maybe he has to book a year or 2 years in advance. and he's not sure when his cattle will be ready for slaughter, so it doesn't work out well for him. On the other hand, if he were able to process locally, he could make arrangements with a local small slaughterhouse and they could work things out, and with his neighbors who might also be growing cattle to be done at the same slaughterhouse. What actually happened is, if you're raising a few cattle and you want it locally processed by what is now termed a custom slaughterhouse, the custom slaughterhouse can process your meat, but they are required by the government to label it as not for sale, not for resale. So the farmer can take that meat home, he can use it for himself, or he can give it away, but he is not able to sell it. Now, we are, and that is true throughout the country. Now, there are, if your meat is processed at a state inspected slaughterhouse run by the state, you can sell it within the state, but you can't sell it to like a large grocery company that has stores, around the country. You can only sell it within the state. And then there's a few states that have joined these compacts, and they can sell meat in a more wide manner, but there are only a very few that have done that. Now, this has caused many ranchers to shut down, and the United States has lost 160,000 farms and ranches in the last 7 years, since 2017. What now, finally, to try to help make farming and ranching economic again, Congressman Thomas Massie has introduced the Prime Act, and he's introduced versions of this for the last 10 years. But this year, it looks like it might actually go forward. And so what the Prime Act would do is allow these custom local small slaughterhouses that don't have a USDA inspector on site constantly, but they also don't have a history of having meat that is contaminated or causing illness, allow them, as long as they're operating under state law correctly, to butcher and sell meat locally freely within the state. So instead of having to mark that meat as not for resale, they could actually sell it for the farmer, sell it to restaurants, sell it to customers within the state. And this bill has had many iterations. Pete will tell you about some of the ways that Massie has tried to get this bill approved in the past. We don't know exactly what the final wording of the bill will be, but Pete can tell us a little more about that.
Well, sure. Thanks, Meryl. The only chance I think the Prime Act has of becoming law is being included as part of the Farm Bill. And hopefully Congress will be working on the Farm Bill next month. In 2024, there was a House version of the Farm Bill that basically set up a pilot program for the Prime Act, where if the state opted to be part of the pilot program, through a 5-year period, they could have up to 10 custom facilities that could sell meat where animals processed at those facilities, meat from the animals processed at those facilities, could be sold by the cut direct to consumers. And at the end of the 5 years, the program would sunset, and then it would be up to Congress to permanently enshrine the Prime Act in law. It's like basically what the Prime Act starts the process of is rolling our meat laws prior to the way they were in 1967. Before 67, you could have a custom. There was no such thing technically as a custom facility. Just the states could pass laws allowing the sale of meat from animals processed at uninspected facilities where an inspector wasn't present, where slaughtering and processing was taking place. And there are even, I think, up to 7 states that allowed the sale of meat by the cut from on-farm slaughtered animals. And many, I think many or possibly all of those states, that activity was unregulated. And there were minimal food safety problems. There are many more illnesses, I think, today, just under the current system. And like you said, there have been Freedom of Information Act requests that have been filed on the number of illnesses caused by custom meat. And there was one filed asking how many illnesses attributed to custom meat over an 8-year period. The answer came back none. There was a FOIA request filed on number of illnesses attributed to meat from on-farm slaughtered animals. And yeah, I think you explain it better than I do, but technically USDA, their response, they said they couldn't locate any illnesses attributed to that activity.
Right. So, when I was a kid, there were butchers everywhere, and you would go to the butcher and they would cut the meat for you right there. If you would tell them what you wanted, and you might even know the farmer. But the farmer is not allowed to sell from his own farm. That is prohibited throughout the country. So it's a real problem for farmers and for consumers. What happens is when all the meat goes to these huge slaughterhouses that butcher thousands of animals a day, what meat is going to go through them? Then it goes to the big grocery stores. You're going to get a race to the bottom, right? There's no advantage to a farmer to grow his animals all on grass and hay, which is the best source of food for cows. All that farmer wants to do is get them as fat as possible, as quickly as possible. And in fact, believe it or not, candy companies are selling their waste products to vertically integrated beef companies like JBS, which is the biggest beef company in the world and in the United States. That controls 25% of all the beef in the United States. They are feeding cows candy waste, as well as anything else that will make them put on weight, and then sell that. Obviously, that the meat from those animals that are being fed garbage is not going to be of the quality of the meat from a cow that's eating grass, which is their traditional food. We also have a problem where some of the imports are coming from New Zealand and Australia, but many of the imports are coming from Central America and Mexico. And the labor there is much cheaper than in the United States. So if you have temporary foreign labor coming in to help on farms, the U.S. government requires, in order to save jobs for Americans, so this is a good thing in a way, it maintains Americans' jobs, requires that you have to pay those people who are coming in temporarily to help with the harvest as much as you would pay an American farm worker. And essentially, although it varies by state, this is around $18 an hour. So farmers if they need the foreign temporary workforce, they have to pay them a really reasonable amount of money. Whereas if the animals are being brought in over the border from Mexico, coming from Mexico and Central America, the farm workers there are being paid $1 to $2 an hour. And the American farmer was trying to do their best to raise the best animals on the best feed, is trying to compete with these animals that have been raised under much cheaper conditions. And so that's another problem that the American rancher is facing. They're actually, we've collected 50 different ways that American farmers and ranches are essentially under attack. And unless we do something about that, we fear that small family farms and ranchers are basically going to become a thing of the past, and we will just have these, gigantic farming industrial farms raising our food, which will have poor quality. Now,
a major problem that we just saw a screenshot of it, or the country of origin labeling laws. And until recently, there were exemptions for beef and pork. So if you did any minimal processing in this country from an animal that was raised in mostly processed in another country, that could be labeled as a product of the USA. So consumers trying to support American ranchers were left in the dark with this requirement. Last year, I think USDA issued a regulation saying from now on you can't do that. There's voluntary, if someone wants to, there's voluntary labeling now where only someone who's raised an animal entirely in this country, had it slaughtered and processed in this country, can name it product of the USA. But there's still a big push to get mandatory country of origin labeling, because with this new regulation that's supposed to come online at the end of the year, an animal processed in, say Mexico doesn't have to label that it's a product of Mexico. They just don't have to put anything in the label on the country of origin. So that's still a big issue before us.
I'm going to repeat what you just said in a different way, because I want everyone to hear this, because it's going to affect their decisions at the grocery store. So what happened is, up until about 9 years ago, you had to label meat with its country of origin. But because we joined the World Trade Organization, we were sued by Canada and Mexico, saying that was hurting their imports and it didn't meet with those rules. So the United States had to pay those countries for this. We lost that lawsuit. And Congress immediately changed the rules, which said that basically any meat that comes in, as long as it's wrapped in the United States, can be labeled that it was made in the USA, basically, US meat. And that was false labeling, but they were trying to deal with the World Trade Organization rules. And we've been living with those rules. So your meat, even when it's grown in Mexico or somewhere else, is being labeled made in USA. Now that's going to change on January 1st. When the United States is getting out of the World Trade Organization, we're not going to do that anymore, but Congress has not changed the law. So on January 1st, there will be voluntary country of origin labeling, which means that some people will label meat that is raised in the United States as made in USA, but the rest of the meat will not have any label as to where it comes from. So you won't know whether it's grown in the USA or grown somewhere else. So you are going to probably want to search for made in USA labels on your meat come January 1, although right now they don't mean anything. Now, what we want is to change the rules back to what they were 9 years ago, where only an animal that was raised in the United States could have country of origin labeling in the United States, and that every piece of meat had to be labeled with its country of origin. So when it didn't come from the United States, they'd actually be forced to tell you that. And that's a law that we want to get passed, so that country of origin labeling will become mandatory, because 99% of consumers are going to look at a piece of meat, they're not going to see a label, and they're going to assume it's American beef when it may well not be.
The ultimate solution too, Meryl, is just to get know your farmer, get meat direct from a farmer. And what Congressman Massey has said, Tom Massey is the longtime sponsor of the Prime Act. It was first introduced in 2015. Is that if this becomes law, and he said this back 5 years ago, he knew of 1,000 custom houses that would be shuttered, that would start up again, because they wouldn't have to put up with all the regulations that the inspected, state inspected, and federal inspected facilities come up with. So if there's one legacy MAHA can establish, which will mean more than anything else, it's to increase the access to quality meat in this country, and particularly beef. I mean, my opinion, beef is the most important health food, I think, for the majority of us in this country. I mean, based on the statistics I've seen, there are over 300 million meat eaters in America right now, and I think beef is the healthiest of the different meats. So it's just getting USDA on board with the Prime Act. It'll make USDA's job easier. It'll slowly start the process of reversing this consolidation where you just have a handful of facilities that are responsible for slaughtering the majority of meat in this country. I mean,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah,
It's remarkable.
just you mentioned that these slaughterhouses the big slaughterhouses might process 300 to 400 cattle an hour. These custom facilities, the quality control is much better. A lot of them might just process a few cattle during an entire day, and they'll process fewer cattle during an entire year than the big facilities will process in one day.
So what we're hoping you will do when you're calling your Congress members, and by the way, so this bill, the Prime Act, that will allow small custom slaughterhouses to start selling local meat within the state freely. This bill has over 40 sponsors in the House, and it has 9 sponsors in the Senate. And so we think there's a very good chance it will pass. And we want you to let your members of Congress know if they support it. That's wonderful. If they don't, they need to get on board. This will really help farmers and consumers to regain control of their diets and be able to access local meat from local farmers. So please think about this. Look for the country of origin labeling. And remember that grass-fed is best, and that if you're not buying grass-fed beef, you don't know what they're feeding these cows. That, as I said, candy waste, it could be anything. I mean, they feed pigs all kinds of garbage, and it seems that has now moved to cows.
Well, Congressman Massey says there's 3 things everyone can do to facilitate the inclusion of a Prime Act or a version of the Prime Act in the Farm Bill. One is to call your representative, and then the other 2 things you can do are call your 2 senators and tell them to support the inclusion of the Prime Act in the Farm Bill, because this is just, we have to roll back the clock and start populating the countryside with farmers and ranchers are raising quality meat again, because the Wholesome Meat Act depleted the countryside more than just about any other law that's been passed in this country. And now we've got a great opportunity to reverse course and get quality nutrition to our children and grandchildren.
Great. Thank you so much, Pete. It's been a pleasure having you, and I'll see everybody next week.
Thanks, Meryl.
All right, we're live now. So tell us your name, please.
Hi, I'm Deborah Jennings. I call myself Davy. I'm a registered nurse. I'm retired, and I have a vaccine injury story, which took many, many years for me to figure it all out. But nursing was a change of career for me, so I started actually in 1992 at the age of 41. And on the schedule was the hepatitis B vaccine before I even started. And I didn't really question that. I don't think it was mandatory at that time for nurses. So I just kind of went ahead and got the first one. I didn't have a problem. It was the second one I had a problem. This was over maybe a 3-4 month period or 2 month period. And that really got my attention because I had pain in the bicep muscle. And when I went for the third one, the gal at I was in a long-term care facility in the Hudson Valley and downstate New York. And I told the nurse there, look, I'm having problems. I don't think I'm going to be taking this third one. And she kind of goes, oh, you probably just didn't have your arm relaxed when you had the second one. Well, I'm a nurse now. I'm injecting people, elderly, but the flu vaccines and the K shots and all these things. So I kind of know how to give an injection, where to give an injection, and what to tell my patients. And so, but you know what? It was one of the voice in the back of your head that's telling you, this woman doesn't know anything. Just walk out and I didn't. So what happened then, for a year, I had pain in that muscle, like somebody just punched me. So I've done research and all that after the fact, and it just kind of progressed. So what started happening in the course of the 10 years I was doing geriatric nursing, so I did night shift, I started having pains going up and down the leg, settling in a hip, and on bad nights went across to the other hip. And this went on and on. I would take a medicine called florboprophene, which was prescription medicine, and that was a 12-hour Spanch, was a little blue pill. It worked really well, so I got through that 12-hour shift, and then, or 8-hour shift, depending what I was doing. And so this really, I find in hindsight, didn't help things either, because then the whole body's becoming more acid and actually accelerating. So what started happening is I actually went and was climbing the Fox Glacier in New Zealand, and I couldn't climb it I had to do one foot in front of the other, and put my hands on the one knee that was up and spring off to get, because you're going high up into the mountains there. So I knew something was wrong. I could not force my body to do the other. And my mom had noticed that one of my legs the calf muscle was skinnier than the other. So what that was really that it had shifted, the body had shifted. It was misdiagnosed by doctors, and I was told that was muscle atrophy. I actually went to a whole physical therapy course, and it wasn't muscle atrophy. It was doing all the work. So eventually this led to hip replacement surgery. So I had 2 of them done within a 14-month period. That doctor told me there was not one cell of cartilage in the hip. And I'm only 55 at the time. That's unnatural.
But are you putting it together that it was the vaccinations that did this at this point?
No.
Okay.
No, I didn't. And it was the H1N1. While I was recovering from my second surgery, that somehow I got in association with people in Great Britain, and one particular gal who was a journalist out of Austria, actually Dr. Mercola has interviewed her, otherwise they've disappeared all her stuff. And I listened to her, and she was kind of forecasting what we're in the middle of now with this pandemic or plandemic or whatever we want to call it. But that was back in 2009, the H1N1. And I figured it out then. I started doing a really, really deep dive, and I started realizing that I had a vaccine injury. And then when Judy Mikovits came around, she reinforced that. If you've had pain in your arm for even a few hours, that would indicate a vaccine injury, whereas mine went on for a year. So what's happened, it's affected all my large joints now. So at the point I had x-rays done after my hip replacement surgeries, the knees lost most of the cartilage behind the patella of both knees. So that wouldn't be from being overweight, because at that time of my life I had more pounds on me than I do today. That's a non-weight bearing, the patella, the kneecap. So it's just attacking the cartilage in my system. So all the big joints are being affected, and systemic pain. And, they told me I had fibromyalgia, but that's just what they throw into the bucket because they can't figure out really what's wrong with you.
How much training did you get at nursing school on vaccines? Because you were giving vaccines.
Yeah,
right?
None that I remember. And here I was older too when I started nursing school. I was
41.
Yeah, I was really understanding everything that was going on there. I understood the limitations of the thinking, because I was always kind of questioning allopathic practice. I had actually started pre-med at the University of Rochester and interestingly ended up med-surg ENT at the University of Rochester Medical Center after I did the geriatric nursing before I had the hip replacement surgery. So I have a really deep understanding of this now, and I've joined Amy Gardner back in 2006 when I retired to Rhode Island. And that was when they were mandating here in Rhode Island the HPV vaccine. And I just said, there's got to be a group here in Rhode Island that's working on this issue, and met Amy, and you'll meet one of the other gals from our group that will come in here with her story. And we collectively have been working with all types of avenues to try to educate the population here in Rhode Island.
What was the last vaccine that you had?
It would have been probably 2008. Yeah, because I was already I was on short-term leave, so that was it.
And what was the last vaccine that you gave?
Oh, that would have been then, because you know what, I never ended up going back to nursing, so it was a 15-year career. But I am a deep researcher, and I've put out some articles that got published, and one on the HPV that went around the world, and because it went into not just a paper but an electronic format. It was before Holly put her book out, but it was similar. I found similar things, and Dr. Suzanne Humphreys have really done an incredible job on the HPV vaccine. So, and it's amazing how a lot of the stuff with the sterilization and the neurologic injuries that happen to the girls and the boys, how we're seeing that with the COVID.
So as a nurse that's experienced vaccine injury and found out the hard way, the truth, what is your advice to those parents, but in fact all of us, as we go into the winter where the scaremongering is already starting?
Well, I do the best I can to tell people my feelings. It's really hard to jump into their space because there's so much, well, they call it cognitive dissonance. I understand, because it took me many, many years to put all the pieces of the puzzle together, to realize that autism, I just thought vaccine injury was for autism for children in the beginning, in the early 1990s. And it wasn't until I met some nurses I was working with that were saying, no, it was the vaccine. So then I knew they were telling the truth. That was their experience. So then I know this is a creation, but I am an anti-vaxxer to the core at this point, because I just understand health is not delivered through a syringe. I've told the people up at our State House that countless times, that there's other ways to boost the immune system, and that you've got to do the deep dive. The information's all out there. I just heard one from Aaron Siri recently on what's really in the cauldron that is making these vaccines, and a lot of this is translating into messenger RNA. We were hearing the flu vaccine, we're hearing is now going to be on that platform, and other even the hepatitis A. Dr. Anna Mahalcha has gotten one of those vials, and it's showing the same thing. So I think people really need to step back and realize that they need to protect themselves and their children, their grandchildren, and it's a big struggle we've got.
Thank you for telling your story. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
We can fight, and we will win. Yes. Sacramento is going to be going.
A 16-year-old girl wins in court after the public school system denied her medical vaccine exemption.
Supporters cheered outside federal court after a judge ordered the school district to let her attend.
The judge held essentially that school districts are not allowed under the law to second-guess treating physicians. 7 treating physicians said that she is at risk of serious harm or death if she takes this 3rd shot.
Finally, over time, we've sort of chipped away at all of the sort of rationales that the court tried to originally impose for allowing this to happen. And we are now seeing with Sarah Doe's case a pretty solid victory that I think leaves no more room for doubt.
The nonprofit Children's Health Defense, founded by Robert Kennedy Jr., has championed her case.
This is the 2nd federal court in New York to find that a school district cannot overrule treating physicians in a vaccine case.
Health and Human Services is reestablishing the task force on safer childhood vaccines. This comes after a lawsuit from an advocacy group formerly led by HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
The National Institutes of Health director said in a statement, quote, "By reinstating this task force, we are affirming our commitment to rigorous science, continuous improvement, and the trust of American families."
The task force will submit its first report to Congress within 2 years.
So this is your win, you the people that donate and pray for Children's Health Defense, that makes it okay for us to be able to help out and fund these things. So everybody should be celebrating because it's because of you this win has happened.